Hello and welcome to the Herdline Podcast, hosted by Trace Johnson and the Herds Headset. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode where the Headset and Trace talk all things Marshall athletics. Be sure to follow us on X and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Now, sit back, relax, and let's talk the herd.
Welcome back to the Herdline Podcast. Trace and the Herds Headset with you as we are getting ready to close the book on the Looking Back at Marshall Basketball Coaches series. We're going all the way back to day one. We're going all the way back to the very first documented coach. And and we talked about this on the football episode that we did of this, that a lot of those old historical record books and data is a little bit inaccurate probably, and some of it's a little bit like kind of conflicting with each other. So this is just based on the Marshall. This is straight off of Herd Zone. So this is straight off of their history books and everything. So this is as good as it's going to get. So if it's totally accurate, I can't promise that, but we're going to do our best to touch on every basketball coach that Marshall's had up until the most recent coach that we looked at, which was Greg White. So we're going to look at everybody before Greg White. So it's going to be good and looking forward to it. And then after this, we got a lot of football talk coming up. Really excited to get into that, but excited to close out this basketball series as well. So I know we've both been really busy here lately with some fun things going on. So how you been doing here, man?
Yeah, I've been traveling the world, it seems, and it's no rest for the weary, but things I think are finally slowing down for my personal life a little bit. And so we're a little bit late on recording this podcast for this week. We do apologize for all of our listeners that are, I'm sure, eagerly just waiting for the next drop of an episode. But
every word.
It is good to be back. It's good to be able to talk a little bit about these coaches. Of course, this is going to be interesting because when you look back, I mean, this is some of these stats are a little interesting, and these coaches coach definitely at a very different time, I guess you could say, than what we are normally accustomed to. Most of these guys were like milkmans by day, and they coach basketball by night. So Should be a good episode. Excited to talk about it, and looking forward to finishing up our basketball coach series.
Yeah, it should be really good. I mean, it should be really interesting because a lot of this stuff is kind of crazy to talk about. A lot of these coaches not only coach basketball, but also coach football for us. And then I'm sure if you listen to that episode, a lot of you all will know those names when we talk about them. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to go all the way back for sure here. So to start with the very first coach in Marshall men's basketball history, at least the first recorded coach. I don't know, obviously, if they had any before this or not, but the name Luther Crotty or Luther Crotty. He coached Marshall from 1906 to 1908. The Marshall data book says that he was a student coaching the team, which is wild to think about. Absolutely wild to think about. He had a 6-1-1 record, so pretty solid winning percentage there from Luther. Can't fault him there. I mean, could you imagine, like, you're a student and you're coach? I mean, it's a different time. It was just a different time. Just leave it at that. So from 1908 to 1917, we had Boyd Chambers, who also, I believe, coached football. If I'm not mistaken, that name's very familiar. I think he coached football. He had a 23-17 record, which is kind of weird to say that he coached for almost a decade and only played that few games. That's just, and obviously the game has evolved a lot since then. But 23-17 record. And they actually did not have a basketball season in 1915-16. Didn't say why, just said they didn't have one. So it is what it is. Random tidbits there for sure. So he was the second coach. I don't even know if the first guy was paid. Third coach being Burton Shipley from 1917 to 1918, had a 1-5 record. So at least he didn't goose egg it. Gotta give him the win there. They had no basketball from 1918 to 1919 through 1919 to 1920. So they went 2 years without basketball. No reason, just didn't have it. I mean, no reason that anything talked about, put it that way. So that's interesting again. And then we start getting a little more consistent as far as playing after that. So 1920 to 1921, Herbert Kramer, I believe, coached football, goes 6-8 overall. They just didn't play very many games in these days. So he coached them that year. The 1921-22 season, we had Gerald Sutton, who had a 7-12 record. 1922 to 1923, J.E.R. Barnes, 3-9. I mean, man, what a name. J.E.R. Barnes. I mean, 3-9. So it is what it is. So 1923, 1924, Bill Strickling had a 9-6 record. Above 500. That's one of the only ones in those days that was above 500. 1924, 1925, Russell Meredith, 13-5. I think he coached football. A lot of these guys are, man, they're just pulling all kinds of duties in these days. So interesting there. 1925, 1926, Guy Fiber, 9-7 overall. 1926 to 1927, Roy Legs Hawley, 7-10 record. I just think that's a cool nickname, Legs, because why not? 1927 to 1931, Johnny Stewart goes 47-28 overall. That had been probably the most success we had seen at that point. So he ended up probably one of the longest tenured, well, definitely one of the longest tenured at that point as well. And then we got to go talk about one more coach briefly before we get into the giant of all giants here. From 1931 to 1935, Tom Dandelet also coached football. I know for a fact because I remember talking a lot about him on that episode we did. He had a 43-36 overall record. Marshall joined the Buckeye Conference in 1932, and they were in it through 1939. And they were the Buckeye Conference regular season champions from 1937 through 1939. So they actually had a fair amount of success in that conference, some of it with Dandelet, but then that would carry over to the coach that followed him. But we'll save a little bit more for him here in a minute. But talk about, if you want to look at some of these real early coaches, what kind of sticks out to you about those guys?
Well, I mean, what else could be said that has not already been said about the great Luther Crotty? One loss in his tenure here at Marshall. That's unbelievable stuff right there. I mean, you just don't see that nowadays for sure. But in all seriousness, there's this is definitely different times. I don't know exactly, the scheduling and different things. They might have only counted conference games. Maybe they played more exhibitions or something. Because just playing a couple of games every single year seems a little bit odd to me, even because if you're going to put a team out there, you'd figure that you'd at least play a couple of schools around you, maybe even a deaf and blind, and call a win or two there. So that's very interesting. I'd like to be able, and I wish I would have done a little bit more digging on exactly why that was the case, if we can even know why. I'm sure there's some historian out there that may watch and be like, oh, I know why, but and if you do, please let us know. Send us a message, comment, or whatever, because that would help us out a tremendous amount. But all these guys are your foundation for basketball here in Huntington. And like we said, it was a different time. These guys had coached multiple different sports. It was more of a coaching job back in those days. I would assume would have been more or less a university-wide job. You were putting your hand in a lot of different, cookie jars, so to speak, and you were coaching multiple sports, doing multiple things. So, definitely different times. Definitely not nearly as, fixated was anybody on sports back in those days too. People were just making a living. They were out in the fields and, manual labor and whatnot. They didn't have time to go just down and watch the local, college play basketball. So, this was more or less a time where it was more of a fun thing to do in addition to your college experience. It was not serious. It was not ultra competitive by any means. The two coaches that you finished there with Johnny Stewart and Tom Dandelet, you kind of see the change in culture just across America. Around that time is whenever people started to take basketball a little bit more seriously than what they did. And now you're seeing universities go from playing 5 official games a year or whatever to now 15 to 20 games a year. So, from that point onward, it's definitely changed, definitely very different. And let's just call it like it is. Up to this point, too, there's not a whole lot of significance that we can talk about with Marshall basketball. Some of these coaches have some winning records. Most of them don't. And, it just is what it is. Just not a lot to talk about so far. But as you mentioned a moment ago, We're about to talk about the giant of all giants, really, in Marshall basketball history, the winning leader. I mean, just really not even basketball, but just university wide. Very few people meant to this place what this man that we're going to talk about next meant to this place. So you go ahead and talk about him.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way to look at it. We talked about him during the football episode, how much success he had for football. He put Marshall football on the map. He put Marshall basketball on the map. He put Marshall athletics on the map. Cam Henderson, that's enough said. I mean, it doesn't, and as good as he was for Marshall in football, I mean, like, what is it? Like, he was top, I can't remember exactly what it is, top 4 or so in wins in Marshall football history. I mean, it was even better in basketball. I mean, it's just wild to think about how a local guy, managed to rise to such degrees in the game. I mean, literally is the guy that is credited for inventing the zone defense and the fast break, things that we see every single night, whatever game you watch. It's just like he's the one that was credited for inventing and perfecting that style. So huge giant in the game of basketball, not just Marshall or West Virginia, the state of West Virginia, just just basketball in general. So we're going to talk about his tenure because there's a lot here to talk about. 1935 to 1955, Cam Henderson compiles a 362 and 159 overall record, winningest coach in Marshall men's basketball history by far. Nobody's even close to that win total. Not even close. Nobody's coached that long. Not even close. So, I mean, he was there for the long haul, and he made it work very well. Some of the all-time greatest players in Marshall history, some of the best moments and wins and successes we've ever seen. So we talked about the fact that they were in the Buckeye Conference there to start his tenure and won it a couple times there. So he was instrumental in that. And they were an independent from 1939, 1948, in which they still compiled a very successful time, including a 1947 NAIB National Championship. So at that point, that would have been massive, absolutely massive, biggest you can get. I mean, awesome stuff there. Some players that he was able to recruit and develop. Wallowak from 1950, 1954, the number 5 all-time scorer in Marshall history. His jersey is in the rafters or on the whatever at the Henderson Center. I mean, he's a legend, absolute legend, one of the best players we ever had. Charlie Slack from 1952 to 1956, 25 rebounds per game in his career. I mean, what more needs to be said? An NCAA record, it's some type of NCAA record. I can't remember exactly the details, but I mean, that is unfathomable. 25 rebounds a game. I know the time was different, but man, 25 rebounds a game. Legend. Andy Tonkovich, 1944, 1948. Another great player for the Herd. One of their top 10 probably all-time scorers, one of the best players right there as well. And looking at they had a lot of different conference affiliations during this time. So after they were an independent through 1948, they were in the Ohio Valley Conference from 1948 to 1952. And then again, they were an independent from 52 to 53. And then they joined the MAC in 53 and stayed in the MAC till 69. So they actually stayed in that one for a while. But they had a lot of different conference affiliations at this point. A lot of wins. I mean, 362 wins. I mean, that is a lot. And you got a national championship out of it. Some all-time great players. I mean, the guy recruited Hal Greer. I mean, some of these legendary players, it doesn't even get much better than what it was. And recently I watched on PBS, I've seen it on a lot of times, but I saw it on TV a while back. It was the Cam Henderson documentary on there. And I watched that, and it was really interesting as well. Talked a lot about his tenure and his upbringing and all the stuff. And I really, got a lot out of that. And, yeah, so just a legend beyond words. So before we move on to anybody else, we got to talk a little bit more about Cam Henderson. So what do you think about him there?
Well, you pretty much mentioned it all there. I mean, nobody has meant to this place much more than what he did. 20 years of just consistency. You just don't see that happen like at all anywhere anymore. This is. I mean, he's just the all-time legend. I mean, there's a reason why it's the Cam Henderson Center. There's a reason why his picture is literally the center of the Cam Henderson Center as well. He is a guy that, hopefully Marshall fans never, ever forget. And as generations come and go and as things change, and maybe even one day they'll build a new basketball arena and they'll change the name and all that stuff. I still hope that if and when that day ever comes, that the younger fans that aren't even born yet, don't forget exactly what this man meant to this place. Because if it were not for Cam Henderson, then I guarantee you that we would not have seen the success and the notoriety and really the passion for sports. I mean, I really think that his tenure brought a new level of, we just care about athletics here. We care about sports. This was the beginning of a foundation that is still being felt even to this day, almost 100 years later, 90 years almost. So just crazy to think about how one man came in, and because of his consistency, because of his forward thinking in the game of basketball and the game of football as well, that he was able to change just everything for our university. So everything that we are today, it can definitely be attributed back to that one man, Cam Henderson, a true, authentic legend, and the one that was really just the original, the guy that set the tone for everybody else that would ever come after him. That was the standard. That was the goal. If you're coaching at Marshall, is to reach a level even close to Cam Henderson.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, he's our Naismith, like he's, I mean, he is, he doesn't get, I mean, I don't think even like nationally, he quite gets like, I don't think people really understand, the two of the biggest, most often used techniques in basketball. That man's the one that came up with those. That man's the one that perfected and invented and worked that craft out. I mean, it's just, I mean, it goes way beyond Marshall. I mean, every team in basketball uses a zone defense at some point. Every team in basketball uses the fast break. That's just what it is. So absolutely a legend beyond words, a legend for Marshall basketball, Marshall athletics. But yeah, so looking at the next coach after Cam Henderson, he had a fair amount of success as well. From 1955 to 1963, Jewel Rivlin goes 188 overall, had some notable moments. Most importantly, probably the MAC championship in 1955-56, in which they got to the NCAA tournament. That was the first time I believe they had ever been to the NCAA tournament. Had Hal Greer. I mean, Cam Henderson brought in Hal Greer at the very end of his career. He was a freshman, and then Hal Greer, and really developed mightily under Jewel Rivlin from 1954 to 1958. Obviously goes on to be drafted, has a legendary career, championship, NBA legend, got named the NBA top 50 all-time players list. I mean, come on. He's the guy. I mean, he's the guy. So got to give Henderson and Rivlin a lot of credit for his development and all that. So very, very good tenure overall there for Jewel Rivlin from 55 to 63. And then looking at the coach that followed him from 63 to 69, Ellis Johnson. And if you remember Dan D'Antoni, when he was on our podcast a few weeks ago, he talked a little bit about this era because he was a very integral part of this era. Ellis Johnson, his overall tenure goes 68 and 80, but towards the end of it, he was really having some big-time success. So looking at the 66-67 team, they made the NIT semifinals, and this is when the NIT was as important as the NCAA tournament. It was same level. They beat Villanova and Nebraska before eventually losing to Marquette and Rutgers. I mean, just great team, man. Great team. Beating, I mean, Nebraska, Villanova at that point, I mean, those programs are very well established even now. But back then, top-notch basketball programs. They go out and beat them, scored 119 against Nebraska. 119 points back in the 60s is wild. I mean, you want to talk about that is the infancy of hillbilly ball that we've talked about a lot on this podcast. That's where all that started right there. The Iron Man 5, I know Dan D'Antoni talked a lot about that. These guys, they never left the game. They played the entire game, never brought really anybody ever off the bench. That's Iron Man if I've ever heard of it. I mean, so Ellis Johnson had a lot of success there at the end, especially Dan D'Antoni, George Stone, recruited Russell Lee, a lot of these just legendary Marshall players. Then he set up the next few years for Marshall to be in a very good place overall. So from 1969 to 1971, we had a coach by the name of Stuart Way who went 25 and 24 overall. So he did okay, but it was really the next coach after that that really took him to a really, really high level, although it was only 1 year. But the 1971-72 season, Carl Tacey goes 23-4. In 1 year with the Herd, 23-4. They finished that season ranked number 12 nationally at the end of the year, and they were ranked as high as number 8 in the country at one point. Made the NCAA tournament. Russell Lee gets drafted, first-round pick by the Bucks. Mike D'Antoni's on that team. Huge stuff, and it was only 1 year. And then Tacey goes to Wake Forest to become their head coach from 1972 to 1985, where he just goes 222-149. So the guy was a great coach, and it didn't matter what level it was. It would have been nice for Marshall to have kept him, but obviously that's not realistic. When you have that much success at a smaller school, somebody's going to pick you up. Even back then, it's going to happen. So great success there. Looking at the coach that followed Carl Tacey was Bob Daniels from 1972 to 1977. He has a 71-62 record, had an NIT appearance in 1973, so not a bad tenure there, not bad at all. And then after that era was over, we start the Stu Aberdeen era from 1977 to 1979. He goes 25-31 overall, and he unfortunately passes away during the time he was the coach in the summer of 1979. So that, I'm sure, just caught everybody by surprise. Awful tragedy there. So that leads to, obviously, they hire a new coach, Bob Zufilato, from 1979 to 1983. He's got a lot of success, 71-41 overall. He was the head coach at Boston College from 1971 to 1977 before he gets to Marshall. He has an 83-80 record there. And he was an NBA assistant from 1983 to 1998. So after the Marshall era was over, he was in the NBA for that long. And he was the Toronto Raptors director of basketball operations in 1998. And he was the assistant GM for Toronto in 2001. And then he was an NBA scout after that. And I believe he still is, or at least has been. I mean, just that is a basketball. That is a ball knower right there. I mean, you got all that college success as a head coach, all that NBA success as a coach, as a front office guy. That is a basketball coach right there. I mean, awesome stuff there. No question. So before we get into the next coach, because there's a lot to talk about with the next coach and his tenure and everything, talk a little bit about those guys. Post Cam Henderson, we had honestly a pretty good amount of success in those years. So talk about some of those guys. What stands out to you there?
Well, Dan D'Antoni said this years ago, and I don't know why, but it's always just kind of stuck out in my mind. I think it's whenever he took the job, he was getting interviewed. It might have been his introductory press conference, or it might have been somewhere else. But he said the statement of, whenever I think about Marshall, I don't think of it as everyone else does, because I mean, whenever you think about Marshall, usually if you're just a regular, ordinary college sports fan, you think, oh, football, right? There's the plane crash. There's the 90s. There's the Byron Leftwich's, Chad Pennington's, all that stuff. But Dan said, I think about basketball instead. And I think the reason why he says that is because he grew up in a time and an era in the state of West Virginia where all of those guys that we just talked about, listed, and he even played for, some of these guys too, where Marshall basketball was not just a program, but man, they were a premier program. They were competing at the highest level. They were beating some of the best teams in all of college basketball. And, some of these guys' tenure was not necessarily, super long. We see the kind of pop in, pop out, Carl Tacey especially, but the success that you saw during all of those eras that you just mentioned in the 70s and the 60s, leading up to the 80s is honestly incredibly impressive. And Marshall was not, I mean, they were a powerhouse really in basketball. They had some legendary players during this time. They had some breakout moments. And this was actually the time where, my dad was just a kid back in the days. And this is the stories that he tells me about going to the field house whenever it was just so packed out and so hot in there. It was just unbearable, but nobody cared. They were all rowdy, and this was an incredibly exciting time for basketball in the city of Huntington during this time period. It didn't really matter who was coaching. I mean, people were going to the field house. They were selling it out every single game. They were rowdy. So this was no doubt a very special time. You mentioned it. making the NIT back in those days was just as good as going to the NCAA tournament. It was a very respectable thing. And that was honestly, arguably, the greatest team in all of Marshall basketball history. That team that was able to make some noise there in the NIT. So, just to see all that happen, I can't imagine what it would have been like to just been a fan back in those days. Just the excitement, just the overall enthusiasm that all fans had, and playing in that small venue that, of course, if you're listening and you have ever been to the field house for any type of sporting event, you'll know that it can get a little bit compact, a little bit tight in there. And I've always pictured it just being so overran with people. I just would have loved to have seen and experienced that for myself. But, some of these are just fantastic coaches that we will remember for a very long time. But as you mentioned a moment ago, the next individual that we're going to talk about is just one of those guys in program history that in all honesty, I don't think he gets talked about nearly as much. I mean, this guy, he made some major noise for Marshall. He was a fantastic coach. So let's talk a little bit about this next guy, Rick Huckabee.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about some of this stuff, it's pretty eye-popping, especially given the fact that, this wasn't, some of this stuff was less than, it's like 35, 40 years ago. It's not even that, it's a long time, but like, it's not that long for like a lot of people. So like this, we were talking mid 80s, late 80s that this stuff was happening. So all things considered, that's not that long ago. So from 1983 to 1989, Rick Huckabee is the head coach for the Herd. He compiles a record of 129-59 overall. He has 3 Southern Conference regular season titles, 1984, 1987, 1988. He has 3 Southern Conference tournament titles in 84, 85, and 87. That is hard to fathom, that much success in that short amount in a 6-year period. To have that many championship moments is crazy. And they get to the NCAA tournament 3 times. Unfortunately, they did lose all 3 of those games, so that's kind of a knock if you want to look at it as that. And then in the NIT, they got to the NIT in 88. They go 0-1 in the NIT, so he did not have any postseason wins. But man, the fact that they were consistently one of, if not the best team in the Southern Conference all those years was really crazy to talk about. Some of these players, man, we're talking some legends, some absolute huge, giants of Marshall basketball. Skip Henderson, that is what it is. Post Marshall, yeah, that's a whole different issue. But at Marshall, yeah, he was something special. John Taft, same thing, something special. Just legendary players. And then you also got Bruce Morris, longest shot in NCAA history. That's nothing to sneeze at either. We just had so much talent back in those days. I know I'm just talking about 3 guys, but like those are just 3 that immediately come to my mind that were just studs for the Herd. But what kind of, I think you talked about it, what kind of probably leads to a lot of people not talking enough about Rick Huckabee is the way that it ended, because it did not end in a very good way. He resigned in 1989 amid a recruiting investigation. So that wasn't great. Matter of fact, the NCAA technically vacated their 1987 NCAA tournament appearance. So technically they vacated that. So that's probably a lot of why he's not viewed. Like, I'm sure people still think he's a great coach, but that's probably why he's not remembered as well as some other coaches, just because it did not end on a very high note at all. And, we never quite recovered from it. Like, we were absolutely smoking on all cylinders at this point. We were like a mid-major. We were a mid-major powerhouse for a lot of those years. And unfortunately, we just could not quite maintain that. And we're going to talk about it here coming up. But before we move on, because this was such a successful period, such a period of time in which we had never really had this much success, we got to talk a little bit more about Rick Huckabee. So what do you got about Rick Huckabee?
Well, in all reality, from results standpoint alone, it's tough. It's an argument to be made. He might be the best, just year after year after year, he was always in contention. As you mentioned, won 3 Southern Conference championships, just unbelievable stuff. Made the NCAA tournament 3 times and NIT tournament 1 time. A 70-24 overall record, just fantastic. And here's a really interesting story that my dad always tells me about this era because, now he's a young man. He's able to travel and do different things. And every single year they would have the Southern Conference tournament located in Asheville, North Carolina. And the fans that were Marshall fans would always carry around $2 bills. Of course, when they would go in and pay for something, they wanted everybody to understand and know that, hey, Marshall fans came and paid for it. So, every time that Marshall came to town, the people of Asheville apparently really loved them. And they would put up signs and say, Marshall fans welcome here, because there would be the majority of the fans literally in the city of Asheville during that time. But man, talk about just excited. You mentioned all of the players. We mentioned all of the accomplishments and the achievements. Just as a result standpoint alone, nobody ever did what he did here. I mean, just plain and simple. His teams were just out of this world. And like you mentioned, the final year, there was lots of just problems and issues and things that took place. And so, it was losing steam. And back in those days, NCAA was just utterly ridiculous. I mean, some of the things that I would assume that, he allowed in would probably have just been overlooked today. And that's a shame. That's a shame. So overall, I tell you what, he is one of the best. And at the end of this, we're going to give our top 5 ever coaches in Marshall basketball history. I'm just going to go ahead and give you a spoiler alert. He'll be in there. But, fantastic tenure from Rick Huckabee. Hate the way that it ended, but still yet a fantastic tenure here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, you talk about 6 years, and 4 of them they had 20-plus wins. 2 of them they had 25 wins. I mean, crazy stuff, man. Crazy stuff. And unfortunately, after this, he never had another head coaching job. That was his only head coaching job. I mean, that seems kind of wild to think about. But so I guess that, all the NCAA stuff going on at that point must have really tarnished his reputation. And like you said, back nowadays, they'll turn a blind eye to murder, essentially. Like they'll just let anything pass now. So, yeah, it's unfortunate the way it turned out. But it was still a very successful time for the Herd. So looking at the coach that followed Rick Huckabee, I mean, 1 year, but man, Dana Altman was Marshall's coach from 1989, 1990. I mean, that just seems kind of wild to talk about. That just seems like one of those hidden little like facts that nobody thinks about. He has a 15-13 record, so that's okay. I mean, Huckabee's last season, they were about a 500 team that year too. So that was about what they did the year after. And Dana Altman, he was never going to – it just did not seem like he was ever going to be there very long, obviously, because look at what he did afterwards. He went to Kansas State from 1990 to 1994, went 68-54 there. And then from 94 to 2010 at Creighton, 327 and 126. And he's been Oregon's head coach since 2010, 382 and 182. I mean, you're talking about a coach that's got upwards of 700 plus wins. I mean, what else can you say? I mean, it just was not going to work. It was not going to work at Marshall because there's no way he was ever going to stay at Marshall for a long time. But 1 year seemed a little bit excessive. Maybe he could have pumped out a couple more years. But with that being said, he was 1 year. So after that, from 1990 to 1994, Dwight Freeman comes in, and the program kind of takes a step back here. It does not quite go well. They go 46-65 overall during those years. And this is the first time since the late 70s that we've had a coach that didn't have at least a winning record overall as for their head coaching tenure. This is the first time we had that in a long time. I mean, through the 80s, man, we were on fire as a program through the 80s. And unfortunately, starting with the end of the Huckabee era and then Dana Altman only being in there 1 year, and then everything was kind of just, I don't know, trending down, I would say for sure. And it kind of continued here with Dwight Freeman. There's no question about it. So before we talk about the last coach prior to Greg White, we'll talk a little bit about these coaches, the last couple, Altman and Freeman. So What do you think? What are you thinking about those two guys?
Well, it's really it's so interesting, Dana Altman coaching here. Like that's just like that is a trivia question if I've ever heard one. Like that's crazy, but still, let's just call it kind of what it is. Through Dana's tenure, the last year of Huckabee, and then with Freeman, Marshall I mean, they have decreased significantly in the
Oh yeah.
90s. They just did. This was no longer the team that we had known in the 80s, right? So I think Marshall really was looking for a guy to come in and be the savior because I mean they had seen such a high level of success, and to now see the mediocrity, they're looking for just somebody to come in and help them out a little bit. And so the next man that we're about to speak on a little bit more is, in my opinion, probably the greatest. I'm talking about schematically basketball minded coach that we have ever seen here at Marshall University. And his success is going to speak for itself here in just a moment. You know, he's going to go on to do some things that is honestly unbelievable. So let's talk about this final coach here in our series, the legend himself, Billy Donovan.
Yep. I mean, how crazy to think about that. They start the 90s with Dana Altman, and then in the mid-90s, you have Billy Donovan. Those are two of the most successful. Those would go on to be two of the most successful college basketball coaches of all time, not just during the time they coached, ever. I mean, you're talking, Billy Donovan goes on to wins 2 national championships. Dana Altman has 700-plus wins. I mean, that is just huge, huge stuff. And they cut their teeth at Marshall, unfortunately, at Marshall's expense because they didn't stay very long. But from 1994 to 1996, Billy Donovan gets his first head coaching job at Marshall. And in those 2 years, he goes 35-20 overall. So at that point, Marshall had not seen any kind of real success since the late 80s. I mean, it had been a number of years since they really were truly good. So this was a nice change of pace. His first year in 94-95, they go 18-9 overall, 10-4 in the Southern Conference. They were tied for first in the Southern Conference North Division. So great first year there. I mean, huge stuff. Sean Moore, 19.9 points per game, 6.9 rebounds a game. Probably very underrated, probably very forgotten player in Marshall's history just based on everything, but very good year in Donovan's first year there. And then the second year wasn't bad either. 17-11 overall, 8-6 in the Southern Conference. So they kind of dipped a little bit there. But, man, he had some talent. Keith Veney, we talked about him on the last episode. Billy Donovan got him. John Brandon, we talked about him on the Greg White episode. Stud. Jason White Chocolate Williams. Come on, one more you got to say. He was there for 1 year. Wasn't very long, but he was impactful while he was there. And then he obviously went with him when he left for Florida the next year and did all he did in the NBA and all that. So, had some talent, had some big-time talent. I mean, unfortunately, you just knew that he was not a coach of that stature that would go on to do as much as he would do. National championship, NBA coach of the year. You knew he wasn't going to be there very long. Like, there was no way. So it was nice while it lasted, I'm sure, but was not going to be sustainable. So talk about those 2 years of Billy D there, because there's quite a bit there. And obviously we know what happened after that with him.
Right. And, just like I said a moment ago, if you're Marshall, you're looking for somebody that would just come and reignite the spark and the energy that, our fan base so strongly desires. Because, when Marshall basketball is good, arguably there's not more support in the city for that particular team than any other sport. It is a huge deal when Marshall basketball is running on all cylinders. And so to finally get a guy that's in here that is able to just get us over that hump of mediocrity and to be able to consistently put the team in winning positions, it was a good thing to see. And I hear all the time from those that are a little older than me that, Billy Donovan was honestly just such a good coach. He was just so smart. And then growing up, seeing him win those couple of national championships with Florida, seeing him in the NBA coaching the Thunder. I mean, just all of those things coming right after. It's hard to believe that Some of these guys that coached here at Marshall would go on to accomplish some of the great things that they were able to do. And I think that speaks to the pedigree of Marshall basketball. We're hoping to be able to get back to that one day, where we are able to see that consistency overall from a program standpoint. But again, Billy Donovan really ushered in another era of very, very, very good basketball that we would be able to see here at Marshall.
Absolutely. I mean, he really did bring in a nice era. He set a nice starting foundation for Greg White. We talked about that during his era, his episode we did recently. So, yeah, got to give Billy Donovan a lot of credit. I mean, he wasn't going to be a coach that was there for 10 or 15 years, just obviously not going to happen. But for what he was there to do, he did it. I mean, he did. So he did a great job. So that quite literally concludes every single Marshall coach in history, at least all the ones that were in the record books. That's it. So that's pretty impressive, I think, on our part to get through all that. I mean, a lot of these guys, obviously, in the early days, it was just a different game, different format, different way of life. And then you start seeing the progression, more and more and more each year, and how serious basketball became for Marshall, because through the 70s, through the majority of the 70s, the very end of the 60s, and basically the entire 80s, Marshall basketball was really good. I mean, let's just call it like it was. They were really good. A lot of success. I mean, a lot of great coaches, a lot of great players. I mean, you cannot underestimate or they were great. I mean, it's kind of losing my words there, but yeah, I mean, they were awesome. Awesome team at that point. Unfortunately, it kind of tapered off a little bit there to start the 90s, but Billy D kind of righted the ship. Greg White did a good job, and that's just been Marshall's problem. I mean, I've talked about this on here before with basketball. They just could never. It seems like over the last 30, 40 years, they've just never been able to sustain success for very long. That's kind of been the thing. I mean, they've had some, there's been some years where they've been really good, and there's been some years where they've had winning seasons and stuff, but they just always seem to kind of shoot themselves in the foot. And that just kind of has been the trend. I don't know why, but it is what it is. But for the most part, yeah, we've had a lot of good success and a lot of good coaches. So you mentioned it earlier. We got to talk a little bit about, we can't close this out properly without talking about the top 5 coaches in Marshall basketball history via us. This is just our list. I'm sure everybody's list is going to be totally different. And honestly, the more I think about mine, I might end up slightly changing it later on. Who knows? But for now, I'm going to go with what I got. But I'm going to lead it off with you on this one. What's your top 5?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a hard decision because there's a lot of guys that are very, very prominent. When we talked about many of them today, and then also in prior episodes, it's just very tough to pinpoint the top 5, because there's a lot of arguments that can be made back and forth about, oh, well, he deserves it. Well, they deserve it. But from what I've been able to see and what I've studied, I think that my top 5 would be as follows. Number 5, I'm going to put Greg White. Greg was a fantastic coach. We talked a little bit about this, his episode, but he really struggled with just overall consistency. He would have a fantastic year, 20-plus wins, and follow that up with, going even. And so just very tough with consistency. But the highs were so high that, I mean, he made a mark. So I got Greg White. Then at number 4, this might be controversial to many, but I'm putting Billy Donovan. And the reason why I'm putting Billy Donovan here is not because he was here for such a long time, not because his tenure was, something that everyone is like, oh my goodness, he was just this legend and all that stuff. But I'm talking about just purely from basketball knowledge alone. Arguably, again, in my opinion, I think he is the best basketball mind that we have ever had here. That's just my opinion. So, just again, 2 years, that's not long whatsoever, but he was able to kind of get the system and the players in that would set up Greg White in the future as well. So I just have to put him here. I think that his mind is so, so vast. Number 3, I've got Rick Huckabee. Again, this is a controversial one just because of the success that he was able to have. I mean, nobody really that coached here ever saw the amount of success in that amount of time that he was able to see. Just fantastic coach from top to bottom. Had some all-time players, all-time moments. So you got to always talk about Rick Huckabee as a top 3 coach. I don't think that he deserves a spot outside of that top 3. He is the cream of the crop. Number 2, I've got Dan D'Antoni. He's the one that really brought us back after a decade plus of mediocrity. I mean, just cellar dwelling, no excitement around the university and the basketball program. We were just known as a football school. Nobody cared about basketball very much. Man, he brought all of the excitement back. And every time that you see the Cam sold out or anything along those lines today, you can really thank Dan D'Antoni for being able to build that foundation. So he's really somebody that made me fall back in love with Marshall basketball and care and keep up with it. And so I got to have him on my top 5. And then number 1, you probably can already guess it. He's the GOAT of all GOATs. He's the first one to ever do it. The man the arena is named after, the man that changed basketball as we know it. That is Cam Henderson. Again, just his value to the game of basketball, what he was able to give to basketball in particular. We're still feeling the effects of it to this very day. So he is my GOAT, the number 1 in all of Marshall history, all-time win leader, all-time just everything. In my opinion, you can't go wrong with Cam Henderson at number 1.
Absolutely can't go wrong with that whatsoever. And it's just, it writes itself, man. It just is that way. So my top 5, I've got the exact same 5 as you. I've just got a couple differences of placement. And honestly, as you were going, I almost changed a couple of these but I'm keeping it the way I started it because I'm going to, stick with what I initially went with. And this is a hard list. This is harder to list than I thought it was going to be because you've got some guys that, were here for a while. You got some guys that were Marshall guys through and through, but you got some that were only here kind of just as a stepping stone and they weren't here very long, but they were extremely good coaches. So it's kind of hard to balance that out. That's kind of a hard balance. So with that being said, number 5 is Greg White. That's the same one as you. I went with Greg White there. Had a lot of success, 4th most wins in program history. Only knock on him on his era was the fact that he didn't get to the NCAA tournament, the NIT. That's really it. I mean, everything else was very good for the most part. 2 of the top 10 players of all time, J.R. Van Hoos, Tamar Slay, a lot of good players. I mean, one of his players is coaching us now. So, I mean, his era is still being felt to this day. So, number 5, Greg White. Number 4, I went with Rick Huckabee. I put him at 4 not because of the success or lack thereof. I put him at number 4 because in a lot of ways it's sort of like this probably is going to might be a little unfair of a comparison, but it's almost like the Charles Huff thing because as much, you can have a lot of success, but it also kind of how you leave the program kind of is a huge factor as well. And I don't think Rick Huckabee left the program in a great spot. I mean, but I'm not even saying, I don't even really know the details of those NCAA investigations. I really don't even know. And it could have just been something to where, we always joke about how the NCAA now they'll allow anything. Back then you couldn't even, like John Elmore joked about, couldn't even take a hot dog from a donor. So it might've been I don't know, very minuscule, but at that time it really was a big deal. And so that's why I have him at 4, not because of the success, but just because, he kind of left us in a little bit of a tough spot, and it took us quite a while to get out of that. So number 3, I've got Dan D'Antoni, the only coach in Marshall history that's ever won an NCAA tournament game. I don't care if you have him at 1, 2, or 3, but he's got to be in your top 3. No, I mean, he has to be in your top 3. Second, I think it's second most wins in program history, I think. So great coach, did so much for us. I mean, in the modern era of Marshall basketball, he is the savior of Marshall basketball. So many great players, so many of the top all-time players in Marshall history, record book wise, stat wise, came from his era. I mean, he's got the 2 top scorers of all time. He's got, just so many legendary players. So cannot praise Dan D'Antoni enough. So he's number 3. Number 2, I put Billy Donovan. And this is on the merit of just him as a basketball coach, not all of what he did at Marshall. This is one of those things that I started with where I talked about it's hard to balance between guys that did a whole lot for Marshall over a long period of time and guys that were just here for a cup of coffee. But ultimately are fantastic coaches. So it's kind of hard to balance that. So just on the merit of everything that he did, and he really did stabilize the program. He got the program back to a respectable level, and I don't think that should go unnoticed. I mean, it was only 2 years, but he really did get Marshall basketball back to a good point. Brought in some hugely talented guys, some legendary players. So I have him at number 2. I mean, I almost switched him with Dan D'Antoni, but I don't know. I just went with I don't know. That's just why what I wrote down to start with. And number 1's Cam Henderson. I mean, if that's not number 1, I don't know what is. I mean, 300 plus wins, all that success, was the man that revolutionized the game for Marshall and really helped revolutionize basketball as a whole. I mean, just a legend, just a giant. We've talked about all this. I don't see anybody ever topping that all-time win total because no coach stays at a school for very long anymore. Like, it's just the way it is. So I don't think I'll be very surprised if anybody ever breaks that win record for Marshall basketball that Cam Henderson has. So that's my top 5. I'm not even as like confident in it as I was in the football one. It's a little harder. This was a little bit harder for me. So it is what it is, but I think we all would agree all these guys are worthy of being on the list at some point. Great coaches. We were lucky to have them. So with that being said, that's it for this one. No more. We've talked about all the basketball coaches. We talked about everybody from day one, as a student head coach all the way up through now. I mean, that's pretty cool to talk about. Good times ahead, I think, for Marshall basketball. I think we're going to have a lot of success moving forward. I think we're heading in a good direction. And obviously we've talked about some of the inconsistencies of the program over the years, but for the most part, we've got a very underrated basketball history that not a lot of people nationally will recognize. And I understand, like, we're not a blue blood or even close to it, but we've got a lot of history in basketball, a lot of all-time great players, a lot of all-time great coaches that kind of gets thrown to the wayside a little bit. So with that being said, unless you got anything else to add, man, that does it.
No, man, I'm good. Go Herd.
All right. Go Herd. We thank y'all for listening, and we're looking forward to bringing you all football episodes coming up as we get ready to preview the 2026 season. It is underway. We're excited. It's time. It is time to get into it. We got some nice guest possibilities lined up as well. We're going to work on all that. So going to be good times ahead for the podcast. So thank y'all for listening, and we will see y'all next time.